Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast with best-selling author Fawn Germer and corporate innovator Michelle Brigman. Come here weekly for career and life-changing conversations with some of today's most influential thought leaders, senior executives, and trailblazers who will share their mentoring wisdom. This podcast is brought to you by the Women's Leadership Network.
Welcome to the Hard-Won Wisdom Podcast. I'm Fawn Germer.
And I'm Michelle Brigman.
And today our guest is Shelley Broader, who is Shelley Broader. She is the most authentic person that I have ever met and is a total superstar in terms of what women can do and can become. I met her several years ago. She was the CEO of Sweet Bay Supermarkets, and she blew into a dinner that I was at. And within 1 minute, you just felt this force of nature. And I watched her go from that to going to Walmart, where she was president and CEO of the regions that included almost everything but the United States. It was just massive. Wait, and before that, you'd gone to Michael's as president of Michael's, right? And then she wound up being CEO of Chicos FAS. And now she's down here in Florida near me, where she's on the board of Inspire Medical. And we got to tell you, this is kind of our first dry run of this because we haven't done this before. And I had to have somebody on this show that I loved who would be willing to do it over if I messed it up. And
You never mess anything up, Fawn.
Never mess anything up. But I'm honored to share Shelley Broader with all of you because she is such a great role model for other women, and with Michelle, who is my partner in this podcast. So welcome.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for that kind introduction. When I look back on all those pit stops along the way, it seems like I can't hold down a job.
Yeah, but they keep getting better.
They do. They sure did. And I learned so much and experienced so much along the way.
You know, the first time I interviewed you, I said, what was your life's defining moment? And you talked about something really hard while you were growing up that involved your dad. And I was wondering if you could tell that story and then how that impacted you.
Sure. We met a long time ago, Fawn. It's probably been almost 20 years. I would think I've known you. Wow. It's probably been pretty close to 20 years, I would guess, in the high teens anyway.
Yeah.
I grew up in the Pacific Northwest. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, and I had, a sort of a great childhood, just spent all my days outside and had sort of a typical upbringing. My mom stayed home and my father was a traveling salesman, and I was the youngest of 4 children. And then one day when I was just turned 14 years old, my life just changed. I came home from school to hear the news that my father had been killed in a traffic accident. And boy, there's nothing like just life-ending news to rock your world. And not only was my father, the head of our household and my dad, but he was also the sole breadwinner in a very traditional household. And so it was my mom, my 2 older brothers, my sister, and I. And, when something like that happens to you at that age, not only is it sort of, life-altering and shocking, but my mom, who was, as I said, a traditional stay-at-home mom, had to make some decisions on behalf of our family and pull my brothers and sisters and I together and say, what do you want to do? I mean, we can sell everything we own and move to Scobie, Montana, 20 miles from North Dakota and, 15 miles from Canada and live with your grandparents, or we can all work together and pool our money and try to stick it out here in Spokane. And so my brothers and sisters and mom and I decided that we would work together as a family unit and stay in Spokane, and took the sort of meager money that we had. And my mom was in her early 40s. She was 42 years old. And she said, if I don't go to school and figure out how to earn a living for myself, we're never going to get out of this cycle. And so my mom became the only non-traditional student at Gonzaga University in Spokane and got her teaching degree, and, changed the course of her life and all of our lives from that. And it, changed me forever.
There's nothing like a crisis to show really, like you uncover what you're made of, what's possible in a way that you would never do it otherwise. Was everybody coming together whenever you were trying to figure out, all right, what do we do? Because you probably didn't even have as much luxury as to mourn. I mean, you had to make sure there was food on the table and keep going.
We laugh. I mean, we thank heavens, gallows humor is alive and well in our family, but, we look back and laugh at it now. There was no such thing as any kind of crisis counseling or grief counseling, or, we were incredibly sad, but it was, get up after a couple of days and go to school. And, the precipitous fall off in my grades today would cause some kind of plethora of phone calls and school counselors and, people coming out of the woodwork to surround people. And I'm not sure anyone in my family even knows or remembers that. And quite frankly, I didn't remember it until a few years ago, actually, when my kids and I were going through some old scrapbooks, and in a bunch of envelopes were stuffed my 8th grade report cards. And my kids were going through my 8th grade report cards. And my son's like, "What's this? You would have killed me if this was my report card." And I'm looking at these report cards from the 2nd and 3rd quarter of my 8th grade year. And I'm like, I don't even remember. Honestly, this is an awful thing to say. I don't really remember. I think I was in such shock. I don't really even remember going to school. I think some of those days. So it was such a different time. And the idea of grief counseling or mental illness or needing assistance or help was so, far off that we just sort of worked our way through it. And there was very little time to mourn. And one of the things that's funny about that, I had terrible vision and wore super, super thick Coke bottle glasses. And when I was getting ready to go into the 9th grade, which is when high school starts in Spokane, I really wanted contacts bad, but they cost $123. And I remember kind of going to my brothers and sister and going like, "Can we scrape up $123? Come on, family. Don't send me to Lewis and Clark High School with these bad nose breakers, give me a shot here." And so I babysat extra hard. And I remember my brothers and sisters chipping in so I could start Lewis and Clark High School with my contacts. Yeah.
You said that some of the takeaway from that, and I'm wondering what else there were, but you said you're not a high drama person because you know drama.
Well, yeah. So my threshold for crisis is, did anybody die? Right. So people would come into my office just hair on fire, and it's over and it's a disaster and this is terrible and you're not going to believe what happened. And I literally would say, "Have a seat. Take a deep breath. Did anybody die?" And they're like, "No, like we lost the data, or, the spring line is ugly, or, whatever it was." And I'm like, all doable, all repairable, everything we can fix, or it's a problem and we'll get over it. But it's like my tolerance for crisis is very high. And it's hard to rattle me, because I've experienced real rattleable events. And I think
were you the lone voice though of that? Let's cut out the noise and focus on what's really important when you are in those professional environments? Do you feel like more people are in the crisis?
Sometimes, but I think that helped me propel my career. And then once you get into a position of authority or a position of power, the tone at the top is so, you just cannot overemphasize how important the tone at the top is. I mean, you see it in politics, you see it can change overnight, from one leader to another. The tone at the top is so important. So when the tone at the top doesn't get rattled and isn't into drama or hyperbole or up and down, then it has a tendency to calm down the organization. I think there is room for real passion. That doesn't mean you're not passionate. There's certainly room for a real passion, and I certainly am that. It's just I don't get panicked in a crisis unless it's worthy, and there are some that are worthy.
I remember sitting in meetings earlier in my career, and literally the VP of an organization would jump up on the table cussing and screaming at everyone about like what a failure and how awful we were doing. And I remember, but early in my career, I thought this was normal. And it was always fascinating whenever you'd find a new leader take over, to your point that you're making, that same scenario would have been, we've got this. Let's pull together as a team. How are we going to get through it? Encouraging and supporting one another. But unfortunately, you have a lot of us earlier in our careers, right, where the norm was the caustic
right.
When I would visit Shelley at the campus, Chicos FAS was huge. That campus was enormous. And there's the guard shack up front. And I remember the first time I went in there and the guard says, "Oh, you're going to have lunch with her? She is so wonderful." And then the woman at the front desk was, "Oh gosh, we love her so much." And what is it that you learned, and how did you learn about inspiring that kind of loyalty and love from people so that they feel good about what they are doing at work?
Well, that was a lovely place, and the people there are kind and awesome. So I was in the supermarket business a long time, 17 years in the supermarket business, and I started in the stores. And, not everybody that works in the stores, in the supermarket store or in a big box retailer aspires to be the CEO of the company. Some people are just trying to feed themselves or feed their children or have a place to go every day. And I was always amazed by how smart the people in the stores were. Amazed. And I think when you don't work in retail and you don't work, especially I would say in big box and supermarket stores, it's probably the same at a Home Depot or Best Buy. When you're just shopping there from the outside, you might have a superiority complex about yourself when you walk into that store. And you might say, I'm so-and-so, I'm shopping in this store. I wonder who's working in this store. Well, I would take the collective IQ of the field. I would take the collective IQ of the Walmart stores would beat the collective IQ of the Walmart home office any day of the week.
What?
The collective IQ of the Publix stores would beat the collective IQ of the Publix home office any day of the week. And the same goes with Chico's, Walmart, Home Depot, Michael's, any place I've ever worked. Just because the people are in the stores, they're not stupid.
Let me stop and put this into it too, because you had that one thing you told me about a boss who told you don't assume because people are upstairs on the top floor that they're smarter.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So when I first went to the stores, I just became amazed, like how brilliant these people in the stores are. Like they're brilliant. They figure stuff out. They don't get great training. They jerry-rig stuff to make it work. Sometimes in spite of the stupid stuff that we, the merchants and the marketers and the corporate office do torture them on a regular basis, they manage to get the throughput of the product in the back door and into those customers' hands with so much grace and so much aplomb and so much class that's unbelievable. And then when you start to talk to them, you realize just straight EQ, just their ability to understand and relate to customers and relate to people was so amazing. But their life situations in many cases were brutal. How they grew up, something really rough in military service, maybe some really tough parenting, maybe an illness, maybe something in their family where they had to quit everything they were doing to go take care of someone. Sometimes life circumstances led these people to a career that they thought was going to be temporary. And then 10 years later, they're the backdoor receiver, at Hannaford Brothers or Publix or whatever. So I just became sort of like, my job was to find these awesome gems within the confines of these people in retail. And help them know that they're just diamonds and they could be store managers, or they could be district managers, or they could, just be the best meat cutter or whatever they wanted to be. And I was working in Central Avenue in Albany, New York, which is a tough store. It was called Shop and Save then, Hannaford Brothers. And I used to close that store a lot, and closing was tough because it was an inner city store, and it was a funny store. It was right on the cusp of a really, really wealthy neighborhood and a super poor sort of a drug enclave and homeless neighborhood. So it had just an absolute mix of customers like no other store I ever worked in. It was really quite fun, but it was a tough store to close at night. And closing a meat department is gross work. Like, you got this hot hose of steamy hot water, and you got to hose down that meat department and clean all that equipment. He was a particularly nice guy, very quiet, hardly ever spoke, really. His name was Mike, and he used to come in and close the meat department a lot. And he was a Vietnam vet, and he, was not a very verbal guy, but really hard worker, and really did a nice job in the meat department. And I used to always do my rounds at night before the store closed, and saw him a couple nights a week, and always said hey to him, and they did a nice job cleaning up and all that kind of stuff. And one night I was walking by, and the meat department had been super busy that day. And I said, Mike, I just want you to know, I can always tell when you close, because the meat department always looks so great, and you've really done a nice job. And he was very shy, and he barely looked up, and he said, Shelley, you're the nicest person in my life. I maybe said 15 words a week to that guy.
Wow.
It still kind of chokes me up thinking about it, because I thought, what are the other 10,000 words that get spoken to that guy? You know what I mean? And so it just was sort of one of those seminal moments in your life where you go, whoa, you have no idea what goes on in other people's lives. Really, you have no idea. And so it just was sort of one of those moments where I think, man, anytime, especially when you have any position of authority, you're so much more powerful than you think, right? So you're responsible for that person's food and shelter in a lot of ways, right? So you have so much more power than you think. And if you can make somebody's life a little bit better. So one way that I judge people in interview processes and all that is how they treat the service staff at a restaurant. I mean, I have had some experiences, one in particular that I can think of, where somebody who worked for me in a very powerful position just beat the water out of somebody for wilted carrots when they ordered a soup and sandwich at a restaurant. Like the server had something, well, A, who cares? But also, what the hell? Right. And I just said that person was done to me. And it's like, why you would choose to, I didn't care. It's just how you treat other people, and especially somebody who is working in a job that's harder, as far as I'm concerned, harder than the one that you have. They're dedicated, they're working with the public every minute. I think in some ways I go out of my way with the people at the guard shack, or the people that are working at the receptionist desk, but I feel like that's part of the job of a leader too, is to be a magnanimous person and to see I see you. I see how hard you're working. I see that you're representing our brand. And I appreciate the fact that every person that comes to see anyone in this entire facility goes through you. And that's a really important job. Yeah. And I think recognizing people for that is important.
Extremely. And you are obviously leading by example. And that's one of the best and most impactful things that you can do with the organization. What are other ways that you would scale that type of philosophy and behavior to impact, across the culture of the brands that you represented?
Well, not tolerate other behavior. I think in some of the companies I had the pleasure of working for, that was part of the culture. I was lucky enough to grow up in a company, Hannaford Brothers, where I would say I really grew up and learned a lot of my sort of managerial skills. That's really part of that company culture there. And I learned a lot and got to sort of solidify a lot of my own leadership style there. But in other businesses, you have to be careful that you're not preaching one culture and acting one culture and then allowing another culture to exist beneath you. And in some cases, people have a high level of skill and performance, but their behavior doesn't live up to the culture. And that's kind of a hard issue when somebody has to separate from a company because their behavioral culture isn't good, even though their actual performance is okay. But I've had to do that a few times.
Or how often you see the leaders, they're like, we're not okay with that. But then they, to your point, they sit and tolerate it because these are the top performers in the company. They're bringing the most sales. They're innovative. And it sends such an awful message to the rest of the organization because you're like, okay, you've got the banner up saying this is what we stand for and these are our values. However, you're not doing anything.
Some of those too long. I've sat on some of those too long where it feels like where it feels like you're a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've sat on some of those too long. Well, I've also believed that people can change. And I do believe people can change, by the way. I know the whole leopards have their spots kind of thing, but I do believe that people are so afraid to give feedback, right? It's like people are so afraid to give feedback that they don't. But when you give genuine feedback because you want that person to do better and you want that person, and there's two reasons why you want someone to do better. Because I want you to, I think you'd be a happier person and you'd be more fulfilled and you would have a better network within your life. And the other reason is just self-serving. You really are talented at the task that you do. And I don't want you to blow yourself up, right? Mm-hmm. I really need you to stop doing these behaviors or I'm going to have to fire you. And then that's going to cost me money and I don't want to, right? So there's sort of magnanimous thing. And then there's also the practical thing. And when you're really honest and earnest with someone about those two things, like if you want to go home and kick your cat, it's kind of not my business. I think you'd be a lot happier if you didn't, but certainly you can do that if you choose to. But at work, there shall be no cat kicking. And here, and here's the things. And I have had quite a bit of success with people over time who realize it doesn't work. I mean, to your point about that vice president that you talked about that stood up on the desk and scared the hell out of people, very effective for the short term, I might add. Very, very effective, but not effective at all in the long run. Right?
You don't trust them. And I mean, the thing is,
people leave, they end up getting fired, and you don't trust them. It doesn't work in the long run. So if you can transform somebody and you can help them see that, if it worked, everybody would be kicking cats, right? Everybody would. It doesn't work. It makes you sad and it's awful, but it also doesn't work. But I do believe with real feedback, many, many people can and will make the effort.
Hey, Fawn.
Hey, Michelle.
Okay, we have all these amazing women that are sharing their stories on this podcast, but what do we do now so it is not a bunch of talk and no action?
Well, that's the easy part. Everybody just head over to the Women's Leadership Network at womensleadershipnetwork.com. And wowza, this is the ultimate mastermind and masterclass for career women. So if you're looking for coaching and inspiration from some of the most accomplished and influential women of our times, and you don't want to pay $1 million for it, you've found your tribe.
All right, so what do we get?
Coaching, courses, community, and connection.
What's that website again, Fawn?
Well, that's the easy part, womensleadershipnetwork.com. So let's flip that on the other side to somebody who's actually working for a jerk. You've seen people from the whole spectrum. So when you've got people who are listening to this who don't want to be CEO and are dealing with people who are difficult but have their own dreams and desires, how do you tell people to chart a career course when they're hitting into the human obstacles of people who are not supportive and aren't tracking them forward?
Different than I used to, Fawn. Different than I used to. Prior to Michael's, I didn't have a lot of empathy around that.
Around
people who complained about their bosses and said, my boss is a jerk and they don't listen to me and they don't really like me and no one's training me. I was a little bit like, I just didn't have a lot of empathy. I thought, oh, get over yourself. You're responsible for your own development. Find a way to learn. Everybody's got a tough boss. Everybody's boss moves on at some point or go to a different department. Suck it up and get tough and move on. So I wasn't super empathetic. Little did I realize I had just a series of one awesome boss after another, pretty much at Hannaford. Through those Sweet Bay years, I had one a little bit of a jerky one, but his boss was awesome and would come to me and go, don't pay attention to him. He's a jerk. Right. So it was great. Then I had the opportunity to work for somebody for a short period of time after BC left, after Brian Cornell left. It was the first time in my career, which is a long time. You'd think this would have happened to me earlier, don't you? It was the first time in my career I ever hit that boss brick wall where this person couldn't stand me. They tried to torture me till I quit. They did anything they could do to exclude. I was the president and COO. It's hard to exclude me from a meeting, but you can exclude me from meetings. Since I'd never run into it before, I was a little ill prepared. So I kept thinking, I can do it. So I kept going like, I can convince him. I can make this work. I can work around it. I'm going to do it. I can make it work. And all my friends who worked there just went like in one day, quit. Met this person, had a one-on-one with him and went, hasta mañana, I'm out of here. And they used to call me. So the head of marketing, the head of merchandising, the CFO, they ran. They used to call me and they go, why are you there? Why are you there? Why are you there another week? Why are you there another week? And little by little, it started to really affect my self-esteem and myself, because I kept thinking, is it me? Is it me?
Right.
Like, I can't. Am I dumb? Did I turn stupid? Like after all those years of success, right? And I knew I used to be good. Like, how did I get bad? And like, it started to affect me. And, so if I think about things I could have done differently, I should have recognized when there are times when you are in a no-win situation. There are times when you should stick it out and fight and remain tough and switch to a different department, and you have faith in the company and there are other tracks. And then there are times when you go, oh, I got to have a plan B and I got to get the hell out of here. And I waited too long for that plan B.
So what made you finally leave?
Yeah. What were the signs? Yeah.
Well, it's kind of a sad story. It's a sad story and a good story. It's a Mike Duke story. Mike Duke was the CEO of Walmart. And I had been talking to Walmart for 100 years, probably 10 years. I'm the world's longest Walmart recruit, I think. And my mom had nasty cancer and was very, very sick and was not going to survive her cancer battle. And one thing, most people know, when you have something really painful going on in your life like that, a big career switch and moving your family. I had 2 little kids and my husband, moving your family and losing your mom all in the same happy 6 months is probably not a great idea. So I said to Walmart, I need to back out of the process. I just can't get a new job and move and do all this other stuff at the same time. And I had gone pretty far down the path with Walmart and I felt really badly about it. And I was worried that they'd never come back because it was like not quite leaving them at the altar, but we were kissing. Uh-huh. And so I felt bad about it. And so kind of a couple of months went by, I was still at Michael's, still very unhappy, like to the point where this guy would be like, are you taking personal time or vacation time to go to Spokane to, see your mom in hospice?
I had a
was
boss who was
president and COO of the company, and we had stores out there. Let's just remember there's probably 25 stores I could go see. Just how do you torture somebody until they quit? Excellent strategy. Anyway, so I'm at hospice and my little BlackBerry rings and it's an Arkansas number. And Mike Duke has the best accent. He's like, Shelley? And I'm like, yes. He's like, this is Mike Duke. And it's like, I don't know about you, but he doesn't call too often, right? I'm like,
And at this time, Mike Duke is what to Walmart?
CEO of Walmart. Number one dog, top dog. Shelley, this is Mike Duke. I'm like, hello, Mike. And he says, I understand you backed out of the process, but he said it way better than that. He says, I understand you backed out of the process. And I said, I did, Mike. My mom's very sick and she's at hospice and I don't know if it's going to be 2 months or 6 months or what it's going to be, but I just can't do any more gobbledygook in my mind right now. And he says, well, are things better for you at Michael's? And I said, no, they're not better for me there. And then he says, just the sweetest thing ever. That's why I just love him. He said, Shelley, are you under the impression? By the way, he would probably laugh if he heard me do an impersonation of him, which I think I might have done to him before. He says, Shelley, are you under the impression that if you went back on Monday and you quit Michael's, that no one in retail would ever hire you again?
Mm.
And I said, yes, I am. I am. Because I think I've had a job every day since I've been about 15. And I think you have to have a job to get a job. And he said, well, if you did, I would hire you when you were ready to work again. And I bet a dozen other people would too. So just something to think about.
Wow.
So I went back on Monday and I quit. And, my mom passed away about 3 months later, and I went to work for Walmart about 2 weeks after that.
That is such a great story.
Yep.
So you raised something interesting to me. And as I talked to just colleagues that are going through an interview process because they are not happy where they are, there's always this question about, do I talk about values not being aligned? Should I let my new employer know there's something around culture? And it's obvious that you shared that with Walmart. How did you approach the conversation around your reasons for leaving?
Dicey. It's a little dicey. And I won't go into too much detail, but the person that I worked, it was very, very risky. And the person that I worked with at Michael's was a former Walmart associate. And they knew this person very well. They knew him very well. And I think that he didn't work there any longer. And so it was, but it's funny. I was just talking to my daughter about that too, because when somebody comes and works for me and they're like, I can't get the hell away from these people fast enough, there is a little bit of hesitancy when you go, yowzer, what are you going to say about us? So I do think, as much as I try to be as open and honest and authentic as I can be, I think there are ways that you've got to couch. You gotta put that in some kind of secret language speak a little bit that says, I loved it there and it was perfect for me. And I felt like I left my best self there. And so the company has changed so much that I feel like I'm not as aligned as I was before. And I just don't feel I'm at peak performance like I used to be. I mean, I think there are ways to go about that, but if you really, it shouldn't be a turnoff. I wish it wasn't. I wish I could see past it. But when somebody comes in and goes, Jesus, get me out of there. These people are hideous. And they might be hideous because I've been there. There's just something on the inbound on that. So that's
there's always
got to tame that down.
And everybody plays a part in that, right? I mean, you've got to have some personal accountability or responsibility for it. But I think it's just something that people want to talk about, but they don't know how without shooting themselves in the foot. So I think that's great guidance.
Yeah. And also there's a revolving door. So right now too, there's such a revolving door of supervision. And I think COVID's caused a big part of that too. But I know people that have had like 9 bosses in the last 18 months. Yeah. At some point, you've just got to have like some kind of, syndrome over who attaching to different people. And it's got to be so difficult that but I'm afraid if you go somewhere else, you're just going to have 9 bosses there too, until things settle down.
It's crazy times.
Yep.
When you were young, did you sense there was something special about you that was going to take you as far as it did? And then, making the jump into actually being CEO of a major company, and then the changes you're going through now, these different life moments. So what did you expect out of life, and where are you now with that? And how'd you get here?
No, I don't think I had thought there was anything, I didn't have superpowers. I wish I had superpowers though.
You got your own superpowers.
I knew that as soon as I knew what EQ was, like as soon as that became something that people knew what that was, I knew I had an ability to understand what other people wanted and desired, and that I could sort of figure out how to, this sounds smarmy, but I don't mean it in a smarmy way, figure out how to alter my communication style or sort of work methods to help that person get what they wanted. I sort of figured that out, in college a little bit too. I knew I was quick on my feet that way. But I also knew, like out of college, I was in banking. And when I used to be in investment banking, which everybody always goes, what? But yeah, I used to be in investment banking and I liked it a lot. I liked the deal side of it a lot. But the other part of it was like homework to me, right? It was like, it just felt like I was in college still. It just was like homework to me. And it was, a lot of paperwork and a lot of clerical paperwork. I also got my first real lesson in ethics there, just a powerful, powerful lesson in ethics. I don't know if I ever told you that, Fawn, but like before the SEC was a big deal, they came and arrested somebody that was my boss and took them away in handcuffs. Wow. Before the SEC did that. That gives you an indication of how bad things were. But it was a great lesson about when you think something smells funny, it probably is. Right? It probably is wrong. And you need to trust your instincts around that. But I knew, as soon as I knew, like I said, what EQ was, but when I found retail, I got hired in finance. So for Hannaford Brothers, I was really hired in the finance side. And they just put me out in the stores because Hannaford thinks everybody has to be a retailer. So you have to go out in the stores for 3 months, regardless. I don't know if they still do that today, but if you got hired in marketing or logistics or whatever, you had to go out in the stores for 3 months. And then you went back into your department. Well, when my time was over, I wanted to stay out there. Like I loved it. And they go, what? Nobody wants to stay out there. I loved it. And I ended up staying out in the stores for years and worked my way up in the stores because that's what I loved. But the stores was the first time I felt like I could use like my whole self out there, like just being myself and just sort of having street smarts. You didn't necessarily have to know the bakery standard practice to know what to do when something happened in the bakery. Just like looking around and having life experience and knowing that lady fell down and like, you know what I mean? It was just like, I just kind of knew what to do in the stores. And then I'm sort of a voracious reader and I read every single thing I could get my hands on. And that's something that I did learn in banking. When I got out of college, I sort of bluffed my way into my first job at Mass Financial Services, MFS, mutual fund company in Boston. And when I got the job, I didn't even know what a mutual fund was. And they had 13 funds. And so I took those 13 prospectuses and I went home with a highlighter like it was Finance 101. And I read every prospectus and I highlighted every prospectus, and I knew which fund was tax-free, which fund was for people under 40, which fund was better, for an institution, which fund was for international. I knew everything about every one of those funds. And after about a month, I realized I knew more about those funds than people that had worked there for 10 years, because I was the only one that read the frickin' prospectus. And it was like, that's all you have to do is read the brochure that they gave you. Seriously. Wow. So I read the standard practice manual for the bakery and the deli and the seafood department and the front end and the cat. And it's like, if you just read that stuff, it's amazing how much you know. A lot.
Who does it? Probably less than 1%, right? Nobody's doing it.
Nobody. I'm telling you, nobody.
So in that then gave you the foundation to really grow a career. So, and then it takes you up so that you're running a company, and then now you're living your life. How's that adjustment for you?
Not working every day?
Yeah.
Well, at first it was hard, because it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen. So I was, working at running Chicos FAS, which is the 3 brands, Chicos, White House, Black Market, and Soma. And, it didn't end the way I technically wanted it to end there. So it was kind of shocking at first. I felt I had a few more years to sort of work on an active daily basis. So at first it felt kind of weird. But then it became sort of awesome. In that I haven't been home since I've been 15. I haven't had a day off, I don't think. And so part of it is great. I'm fortunate enough to be married to a great person, right? I have a wonderful husband and 2 sweet little children, 2 little tiny babies. They're one's graduated from college and one's a freshman in college. And so I'm kind of having fun, just learning and, trying to stay current. And then quarantine hit immediately afterwards. So there's part of me that's relieved that I didn't have to lead a business through COVID-19, because, oh my God, my poor friends are just strung out and exhausted. But then there's that little weird part of me. Oh, no one loves a General Patton moment like me, right? Oh, I secretly loved hurricanes, right? That's like I kept coming back to Florida because the year of 5 hurricanes. Oh, no one loved the year of 5 hurricanes like me. Just slap that General Patton helmet on. I couldn't get down to Punta Gorda fast enough after that hurricane, just handing out bread loaves. Oh, I secretly love a good crisis. What the hell's the matter with me?
What is wrong with you is right.
So there is that part of me that sort of loves a good crisis too. That's just a sick part of me that I try to shove down, but it rears its ugly head sometimes. But oh my God, people are exhausted. So now I'm trying to sort of just build this portfolio career. I love board work because I love strategy. I love the figuring out the white space and then saying, this is the space that my company wants to occupy. And this is the space that I think my competitors are trying to hog. And here's how I've got to outmaneuver them. And here's the strategy that I need to build. And here's how I need to acquire my talent. And I love that strategy piece of the game. And I think that's really where boards can add the most value in helping and supporting management. And so I love board work, and I always have. I love my own board, and I love being on them.
We could talk to you forever. You are absolutely the perfect person to do this first run with. And so we're going to make you come back for sure. It's been great. I want Michelle to wrap up if that's okay. And Shelley, thank you.
Well, thank you, Fawn. I always love talking to you.
Michelle?
Yeah, so a couple of the, I would say, hard-won wisdom takeaways that I know personally really resonated with me is that you didn't say it this way, but really speak your truth, right? You were honest and open about what was important to you. You were willing to step out and be your true self, no matter whether it was with the people you were leading, the people that you were interacting with, your leadership in terms of what your needs were, your interview with Walmart, it was a matter of you took a risk to be just really open and honest about what was important and what you valued. And I think that that theme right there really carried through with a lot of the reasons I think that you've had the success you've had. And I think, for so many women, we're afraid sometimes to let our true selves shine through. We're trying to replicate how we see the men doing it or somebody else. And so that was a gift that you gave, and I really appreciate that. I also just really resonated with the fact that you got to keep moving. Things get tough, and you got to keep on moving and put it in perspective. Like you said, no one died. We're going to figure this out. So as a leader, how do you bring that sense of calm to your organization and those people around you? So those are just phenomenal pieces of wisdom for us. So thank you.
Shelley, thank you. People, subscribe to us, give us good reviews so that we get more people in here, and let us know what you all are interested in hearing in future episodes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, Fawn.
Hey, Michelle.
Okay, we have all these amazing women that are sharing their stories on this podcast, but what do we do now so it is not a bunch of talk and no action?
Well, that's the easy part. Everybody just head over to the Women's Leadership Network at womensleadershipnetwork.com. And wowza, this is the ultimate mastermind and masterclass for career women. So if you're looking for coaching and inspiration from some of the most accomplished and influential women of our times, and you don't want to pay $1 million for it, you've found your tribe.
All right, so what do we get?
Coaching, courses, community, and connection.
What's that website again, Fawn?
Well, that's the easy part. womensleadershipnetwork.com.